What an interesting story today. New reporting revealing that U.S. Justice Department lawyers flew to the U.K. while President Trump was last visiting the U.K. And while they were there, they spent 16 hours interviewing this man, Christopher Steele, the former veteran British spy who is famously the author of the controversial dossier that bears his name and will forever, the original document that alleged those links between Trump associates and Russians before the 2016 election. A source told Reuters news agency Steele's information was deemed sufficiently credible enough to extend the investigation of the Inspector General back here at home at the Justice Department. Meanwhile, former Trump business associate Felix Sater was questioned by House Intelligence Committee today about the Trump Tower Moscow project. Following his closed-door testimony, Sater spoke to reporters.
What were you able to reveal about the deal, Trump Tower Moscow deal?
I revealed everything, all of the knowledge I had about the deal, I revealed to the committee, as well as to every other committee that I've testified in front of, fully and completely, and answered every question that was asked of me.
Well, let's wait a minute right there. In fact, the House Intelligence Committee didn't exactly agree with Mr. Sater's self-assessment there. A spokesperson released a statement that read in part, "While we do not typically comment on closed interviews, we must correct the record. Mr. Sater has not fully cooperated with the committee, and he will remain under subpoena until he does so." That gets your attention. Today, we also learned the House Judiciary Committee will vote Thursday to authorize a dozen subpoenas as part of their obstruction of justice investigation. The list includes some big names like Flynn and Kushner and Rosenstein and Sessions. And a reminder, we're just 8 days away from Mueller's scheduled testimony on the Hill. So to talk about all of it, back with us tonight is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, former senior FBI official who served as counselor to Robert Mueller for a time. Also happens to be presently the host of the MSNBC podcast called The Oath. And Chuck, first of all, what do you make of the Steele story?
Well, interesting. First, Brian, I should tell you that the Office of Inspector General at the Department of Justice and the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, have good reputations, fair, nonpartisan professionals. That's good news. You can trust their report. Second, Mr. Steele didn't have to cooperate with this. He's a foreign national. He doesn't work for the Department of Justice. He never did. And so he sat down with them voluntarily, which is a good sign. He wanted to tell the story, and he wanted to make sure that the Inspector General had all of the facts at his disposition before he wrote his report. So that's helpful to the Inspector General, and then ultimately will be helpful to us.
Well, you may recall how media on the left held up the Mueller report as being the big document they were waiting for. I've noted media on the right have held up this Inspector General's report as what they have been waiting for. Do you think something that never happens these days will happen if he is the man of good repute that you report he is? Both sides will respect his findings?
I sure hope so. Look, both sides should respect the report that Mueller wrote. Both sides should respect the report that Horowitz writes. He is a good man, and he runs a good office, and it's an incredibly important one, right? The Department of Justice is made up of human beings. Human beings are fallible. They get stuff wrong from time to time. It's the job of the Inspector General to figure out what went wrong and make recommendations to fix it. So I don't see it as a left issue or a right issue. It's a good government issue, and we should look at the report in that way.
Now, Chuck, into some dicier territory. What do you make of what the Attorney General has said in the last 24 to 48 hours about Mueller's testimony? He at first said he had no problem with Mueller testifying, and now kind of using a double negative. If Mueller didn't want to testify, he would support that as well. He used the expression public spectacle. First, do you think it's still a slam dunk that we will hear public testimony on live television, on this network and others, in front of two congressional committees from Mueller? Second, adjust people's expectations for said event.
Sure. I think it's more likely than not that we'll hear from Bob Mueller next week. He said he didn't want to testify. It looks like it's going to happen. Stranger things have happened in the last 2.5 years, Brian, as you well know. But right now, as we sit here, I think we'll likely hear from him. In terms of telling you what to expect, Mueller told us what to expect. Mueller said he's not going to go beyond his report. I work for the man. I would take him at his word. If he says he's not going to go beyond the report, he's not going to go beyond the report. So I think it raises another question, which is, how do you question Bob Mueller, right? What are the things you ask him to elicit the most helpful information? That's going to be tricky, I think, for the Democrats.
Well, give us some examples.
Sure, happy to. When I was a federal prosecutor conducting a cross-examination, we would ask only questions that we knew the answer to, and we would do it in sort of short declarative sentences, meaning, Brian, I'm sitting here on your show tonight and I'm talking to you. Isn't that true? And you would say yes. And so in the same vein, I could imagine members of the House asking Mueller, I'm going to read a paragraph to you, pick out a really salient, interesting paragraph from the Mueller report. I'm going to read this to you, Mr. Mueller. Having read it to you, did I read it correctly? Did anything change? Is that what you wrote? Do you have any reason to think that's no longer true? I mean, there's a way to take him through the report and elicit answers that will be helpful and illuminating. I worry that the Democrats and the Republicans are going to try and go far afield, and Mueller simply won't go there with them.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.